start to, just listen and be aware of a lot of needs out there. I just got a text this morning, a guy I went to college with discovered he has bone cancer. And so there's so many people. And, last week I said, if you find out you have a health problem, a disease or something, and you begin to change your life because of that, you've been living wrong all along. Isn't that true? Right? Why does it take something like that to do that, right? And we should all be mindful of that. Let me just tell you, if you right now are living free of any kind of sickness or disease or whatever, I want to encourage you, wake up and just be thankful. Be thankful in the morning. Say, thank you, God, that I have at this point in time, I have good health. I'm able to live my life free of pain. I think of Tracy and others who have RA, who are in pain every single day. Right? And sometimes you go to the doctors and you try. Mary Ann had kind of a misdiagnosis for a while, but now she has somebody diagnosing her well, and she's progressing. And I think that prayer is an important part of that. I really do. So I want to thank you for your prayers, especially for those going through these things right now. And July 11th, I have my surgery, and I feel good about it. I'm excited to have it, get it done with and kind of move on. And so I appreciate your prayers in that. Listen, today we're going to do something a little bit differently. I have a good friend of mine with me. He's a pastor. We talked about him before, Dave Stradling, up in Awaken. It's up in New York, in Westchester. Been pastoring up there just a few years shy of how long we've been here, and him and I have been friends for a while. Well, how many remember the Advent book at Christmas time? How many got that book and read that book? Well, Dave wrote a new book. And we're gonna do sort of a podcast kind of format. If I could have these guys come up right now, Scott's gonna kind of lead us. We'll kind of show you what we do at the podcast, and just kind of have some discussion. We were going to kind of open up for questions, but it'd be kind of too difficult logistically for a microphone and so forth. So we kind of know some of the questions. Dave had a book signing yesterday, and kind of know some of the questions that people are interested in and so forth. And so we're going to do that. Where did it go?
We had this all planned.
Michelle, did you take a microphone?
Oh, right back there. Oh, here we go.
Right there. We're good. Scott's not used to being on stage in front of people. He's
check 1, 2, check. You're very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And before we start, I need to say hello to Awaken. This is the first time we're doing a live stream all the way back to New York, so had some technical difficulties, but I believe it's worked out, so hopefully you guys are, where's the camera, right there? I'm pointing at the camera, right? Yeah, like right over there.
That's right up there somewhere.
So hopefully you guys are joining, and so great that I can still be with you virtually all the way from here in Western Pennsylvania.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it's good to have you here, Dave. And so what we're going to do is, Scott's usually the kind of the, what do you call yourself, a moderator or something? Kind of leads
moderator.
Leads our podcast and so forth. And I'm going to apologize right now for any dad jokes that come out. Did I say dad jokes or bad jokes? I forget what I said.
I think it's one and the same.
I think it's both. Yeah, one and the same. So, so why don't you turn it over to you, Scott, and kind of start your...
You know where cows come from? We're going to start since you led into that. New York City. You know where pigs come from? Pittsburgh. Who got that? All right.
Hey, hold on.
Can I get a loaf of bread too?
We need to make one change here. Stand up.
Yeah.
Scott is having difficulties with a chair that moves. There you go. That's not going to slide on you now, is it?
All right. We were going to make Dave Stradling the star of today's show, but Jeff forgot his pants. This is incredibly distracting.
Okay.
But I'll carry on. Like any good host, I decided to be as prepared as I could to talk about our guest, Dave Stradling, and so I went to Google, of course. So I Googled Dave Stradling. Have you ever Googled yourself?
I have not.
All right, well, you're about to find out what I found out. Yes. So the first Dave Stradling comes up, and it's author Dave Stradling, and I'm thinking, oh my God, our Dave Stradling is #1 in the search. Professor Dr. Dave Stradling from the University of Cincinnati, who apparently has written a couple of books about New York, so not #1. #2, meteorologist Dave Stradling.
Still not me.
So from Rapid City, South Dakota. Have you ever been there, Dave?
I have never
All right,
been to
so-
South Dakota.
Not our Dave. Number 3, a high school teacher from Santa Clara, California, Dave Stradling. Still not there. So we're starting to get worried.
Wait, how far do we have to go here? Are you gonna?
on like the second or
we're
third
getting
page.
close. We're getting close. We have a lot of time to fill. All right. So that's third. Then I see Dave Stradling, and it's right below the criminal records search for all the Dave Stradlings of the world, of which there are many, by the way.
Really?
So there he is. If we kick out the criminals, he's 4th in the search. Lead pastor, Dave Stradling from Awaken Westchester
There you
Church.
go.
So there's our Dave. 4th, actually, technically in the search. So our goal in the coming weeks is to make our Dave Stradling, author Dave Stradling, #1 in the Google search by reading and supporting him in this book. All right, so can we do that?
Thank you.
All right, welcome Dave Stradling. Bet you've never gotten that intro before, have you, Dave?
I have not, but I
All
loved
right.
it. I wish every intro was as good as that one.
We thought we'd start by asking, I think a lot of us, how many people think they might have, if they had the courage to write a book, have a book in them? Anybody have a book? You know, if Jan wrote a book, would you read Jan's story? I think you would. Jan, do you have a book in you? All right. Well,
Have you read a book before? Have you read a book? Okay.
This is the man that can help you. Dave, how do you start, anyone that might have an interest in writing a book, where do you have the courage to start to jump into that process?
You put one word down. And then you write a second word, and then a third, and then a fourth, and eventually you have a sentence, but then you don't stop there. You keep writing more words, more sentences. And we were talking about this a little bit yesterday at the book signing. Someone asked, well, did you just sit down and write for an hour, a day? You know, some people, they'll rent out, I know authors, they'll rent a writing cabin for a week, a month, or whatever. They just go and they pour themselves into their writing. That's one way of doing it. The way in which I've written this book, my previous one, what seems to work for me, especially in the season of life that I'm in, small chunks. And I spoke to one of my friends yesterday who was there with us. He's an artist as well. And he said the same thing. You just, day after day, you set aside 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 15 minutes if that's all you have, and you write a little bit. And I think it's the same thing for any project. It's for writing a book, of course, but anything that you want to work on, any passion that you have within you, you give 15 minutes to it one day, or you give 30 minutes to it. Well, at the end of the week, those 15 minutes, those 30 minutes, they'll add up. After a month, after a year, I mean, you have a finished product of all the goodness that you have stored within you. So that would be my advice, is you block off a set amount of time, what you're able to do in your schedule, and then day after day. I think I heard this great thing. So Jerry Seinfeld, we all know Jerry Seinfeld?
They know a little bit about him.
They know a little bit about him? Okay.
From church.
From church. Oh, is he? Are you?
I quote that show more than any other show.
Jerry Seinfeld said early on in his career he wanted to become better at crafting jokes. So he decided that every single day he would write a new joke. Then he had a calendar right there by his desk. And he put, every single day that he would write a new joke, he would put an X on the day that he wrote that joke. Then the next day, a second X after he wrote a joke, third day, fourth day. And he said that he would just do this day after day. He would look up at his calendar and he did not want to break the chain. He saw that string of X's. And now, I mean, Jerry Seinfeld apparently is pretty famous here because of Jeff, but he's a great comedian because he did a little bit of work every single day, and it built up over time.
Hey, Dave, how long did it take you to write the book then, to get to where it is, to publish it?
This, about 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
I know Scott's going to ask you. Talk a little bit about the premise of the book, how it came about. I'm sure they might be interested in that if you're ready for that.
This is a book about a mentor and a mentee.
Yeah.
And the mentor is Rob Bell. Can you give us a little background on Rob, and then kind of how you met and how that inspired this inspirational book.
Yeah. Rob Bell, he was a pastor in Grand Rapids, Michigan for a while. Well-known church. I followed the church for a long time, used to listen to his podcast. He is an excellent speaker, communicator. Every week would always gain some wisdom from his sermons. As I was starting pastoring, trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to give sermons? The model, the style of the sermons that I give, I built it around Rob's style of giving sermons. And so I followed him for a while. He was an author. He wrote numerous books, read those books. He was a New York Times bestselling author. One year he was top 100 people in Time magazine. So I had followed him for a long time. Eventually he left pastoring. He moved to California. He started doing these 2-day events, as he termed them, which are all about, I would say, soul care. How do you care for yourself? So he would just talk about rhythms and the ways in which you do ministry in a healthy way, or the way in which you live life in a healthy way. Then he also would have these 2-day events on communicating. Again, he was a brilliant communicator. He would go and show you how to craft a sermon or how to give a talk. I went with Jeff probably about, 14 or so years ago, I think at this point now. We went to California. I went to one of these 2-day events. At the end of the 2-day event, everyone's lining up saying goodbye. I get in line, I ask him, I say, hey, do you ever do any one-on-one sermon coaching? I'm just starting out, I'm a pastor, I'm giving sermons each week, and if I could send you a sermon or two, have you critique it, you offer some feedback to me, any chance that you would do that? He said yes, and we started an email relationship from that moment forward, where he just said, hey, I like what you're doing here, I like this sermon, I think there's a lot in here, there's a lot within you, so why don't we just keep this conversation going? And whenever you have your best questions, he didn't want my junky questions. He said, whatever your best questions happen to be, the questions that you have been sitting with for weeks, for months, that you just can't find an answer to, send me those best questions, and we'll just kind of take it from there. We'll be on this journey together. So that's the premise of this book. It's 8 years of our email conversations of my best questions to Rob, his wisdom, what he had to offer me. And then in the book, I give some of my reflections, what I learned through our emails, what I was learning in my journey. I gave some of the backstory about why I emailed him. What was it that I was going through? What were the situations, the circumstances in my life? And what was I looking for as I emailed him? So that's the whole premise of the book. So it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. It covers 8 years of these questions of my journey and my story of pastoring and living life as a human.
One of the things through the book, Michelle was reading the book, and she said, I think this book would be good for, obviously it's good for anybody to read, but people in the church to read, to get a window into the life of a pastor, what a pastor goes through, because, a lot of people think it's just, the big joke is, I work 1 day a week. And I don't. I work 1 hour a week is what I work, not 1 day. But yeah, and get an idea of what, kind of what it takes to do something like that. So I think there's a lot. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about what's the demographics for the book. So you might think, well, it's between a pastor and another pastor and about pastoring, but there's so much more in it than that. We could talk a little bit about that too, but I think it's for just really anybody. I think you can get something out of it.
When Dave told us he was writing books and was about to come up with the first book, I thought as a good friend I should provide him with some expertise. So what I did was I gave him some great Marty notes, because he listened to the podcast. Great title ideas. So these are what Dave rejected, and I thought I would share them with you to see what you think. And it's not too late with your
maybe if I hadn't rejected
book.
Those, I could have made my way higher on the ranking in Google.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's our goal, as stated. All right. So these were the book titles that I gave Dave Stradling that he clearly has rejected. Straddling the Line. Straddling Babbling? No. Saber Rattling was Straddling. Getting better?
No.
Paddling was straddling. No, not that kind of paddling. The paddling like in water paddling. That'd be a good follow-up to learning to float.
Sequel.
Keep that in mind. How about the grapes of Stradling? I'm almost done.
I should have cleared the script
Of mice,
for you.
of mice and Stradling. War and Stradling. And finally, the adventures of Huckleberry. Stradling. So, keep those in mind.
All right. All right.
Or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, third book. So if this were the podcast, we'd be on episode 110, by the way. Dave has joined it. If there's any reason at all to listen to our podcast, Not Your Father's Faith, this would be the reason to listen. Dave brings a tremendous perspective and youth to this old man podcast. So we appreciate this would be episode 110. So we're going to have you on again soon.
Yes.
Do you have a third book in you, by the way? Have you thought of that yet? I've got some title ideas here.
There's nothing coming out in the near future.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, I wanted to ask you about, we talked a little bit yesterday about this, and I think this pertains to all of us. In the book, he deals with stress and burnout, right? And I think we talked about it a little bit before, too. A lot of that comes from expectations you put on yourself in life. How many agree with that? Put expectations on yourself, and then you fall short, and you feel like you're not accomplishing what you want to. And so Dave talks about in the book about experiencing burnout and a lot of different factors in that. But I'd be curious to talk about how do you manage, what is success, right? How do we go about in our life, all of us, determining whether our life is quote unquote successful? Am I a successful parent? Am I a successful spouse? Am I a successful pastor? Because I know early on I had ideas of what Freedom Life Center was going to be, and I'll get wind into that. I thought, I wanted to reach people that don't go to church. I wanted to reach a young generation, and I wanted to have a church of that sort of thing. That was my expectation. And then I started getting all these old people coming to church, like Marty, and he's coming. I'm thinking, what is he doing here? And it wasn't what I expected or anticipated, and then you start to wonder about it, and then you get church hoppers, going from different churches, things like that, and so for a while I felt like I wasn't succeeding in what I thought, and what I really had to do is I had to change my expectations and say, it's not for me to build the church anyways. The Bible says that's God's job, right? I'll build my church. The gates of hell won't prevail against it. And so a lot of the pressure we put on a lot of the stress we feel is self-inflicted. We do it to ourselves. So I want to know how much that fit into your struggles as a young pastor when you faced that, and you talk about that, and how did Rob, because Rob went through, I've never been through burnout. I have a different kind of personality. The things that stress you out, I thrive on, And so Rob had a total meltdown, total breakdown. He was in a fetal position on the floor in his office, and he had to go to counseling, and I've never experienced that at all. So how can you talk about that a little bit, of how he probably really helped you through that kind of time?
Sure. Yeah. So the subtitle of the book is Surviving Burnout. Right at the center of the book is my experience of burning out and realizing, oh my gosh, I can't give another sermon right now. I have nothing here in my tank. And it had been building for a while. I had all these signs telling me, slow down, take a break, rest, all the important things that we know we need to be doing in order to stay healthy, but we kind of push them to the side because we just keep going on, because that's what we're taught to do. We're taught to just put your head down and just keep going, don't show emotion, and just barrel through it because that's what the larger world tells us to do. So then I hit this moment, and as I was recovering from burning out, as I was beginning to relearn how to live and putting my life back together, one of the things that I realized was I was carrying within me these unhealthy expectations. And I think the emotional component of my burnout is way more than any physical component. I was just carrying these heavy emotional burdens and weights that were just leaving me exhausted. One of them being what Jeff was talking about, my definition of success. You're young, you start a church, you have all of these models of quote unquote successful churches. They have hundreds of people, thousands of people. You hear stories of, like you go to these conferences. I went to a conference, here's how you start a church. And they don't talk about the small churches. They talk about the big churches. So every single picture that you're given of what a successful church planner looks like is, well, you're growing by 10, 20, 30, 50 people, whatever it is, a week. And the building that you start in 6 months later, like you need to get out of that building, or you need to at least have 10 services because people are gonna be just jammed in at the seams. There's gonna be no space for anyone. So I was carrying around this expectation within myself that in order to be successful, I need to have a church that grows like all the other churches that I had seen. In order to be a successful pastor, I needed to be leading a church that was as big or as large as these other churches that were modeled for me, that were constantly being thrown in my face. And when you start out, and in that first year, you are looking at 7 people, and half of them are your family. It does something to your psyche. It messes you up psychologically. So I was carrying around this idea that I was a failure because my experience of starting a church wasn't like these models that I had been presented with. Then, as I started thinking through, here's what led me to this place. How can I move beyond this? How can I be sure that I don't end up in the same place again? How do I not burn out again? I came to realize that success cannot be defined externally for us. And I think that's what happens a lot. We go on our social media, we see pictures of success all the time, of what other people are doing, what other people are bragging about, or we're presented a picture externally of people who are successful. But the truth is, true success can only be defined by each one of us. And it's internal to us. So as I was putting my life back together, I realized if I keep carrying a definition of success that is external to me, that is being pushed on me by others that are outside of myself, I'm going to end up burning out again. Because I'm going to keep putting these unhealthy expectations on myself, and I'm never going to live up to these extreme expectations that I've been carrying with me. And I came to this point where I realized I get to define success for myself. I don't have to let other people tell me what success is any longer. I can create my own definition of success. I can create my own expectations that are way healthier than all these toxic expectations that I had been living with. And as I made that shift, I feel like my life began to change, because now I was living by a different set of metrics. I wasn't living by their metrics out there of what other people were trying to throw on me, but rather there was this, can we say, divine expectations that I believe the Spirit helped me to determine for me, for my life, and for the particular season of life that I was in that moment. And then obviously things keep changing depending on what season of life you're in. And so for me, I think that's been kind of one of the big changes that I've made that's allowed me not to get back to that burnout spot.
You know, Dave, I've been talking a lot about it here past months and so forth about how you live, right? Not living outside in, but living inside out, starting with the Spirit, right? No one knows the mind of God but the Spirit of God. No one knows the Spirit but the Spirit of man. We don't know the Spirit of God by our own intellect. Our own intellect is engaging with the world out there. And so when we do that, it's so funny. I meet people all the time, and they talk about their life, and they say, well, you know, I'm not such a bad guy, because they compare themselves to somebody worse than them. I'm not like them. No one ever compares themselves to Mother Teresa. No one ever says, well, yeah, maybe I'm not so great. You know, it's all this external stuff. And so I like what you said there about this internal thing, and it's not something internal in the sense that's even myself. The Spirit helps me define what success is, so God places in my heart what He desires me to do, right? What He desires to do in this world, right? And so success isn't even about, we can't save anybody, we can't make anybody grow. We just use the tools that God's given us to do that as a pastor, right? No matter what you do, given those tools, and then it's up to everybody else. We're not no pastor is responsible for anybody's salvation or anybody's spiritual growth. We're just not responsible, right? And so if you make that your metric, right, then you're going to look and you go, wow, I'm a failure. I look around at the church, and I'm not going to mention anybody's name, but I see growth, right? I see it in people's lives, that the fellowship that we have together, the type of ministry that we do here at Freedom Life Center, that people are changing. People are becoming, more patient, less irritable, and just more well-rounded. And I look at that and I go, that's great. That's success for them. But even if they didn't, I'm still doing what God has me to do. And I could look at that and say, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing.
So you mentioned earlier about how Rob had helped me through it because he had his own experience of burnout. And just from what you said, one of the big things, that he was huge on this, and this was another huge shift for me, he calls it Eucharist living. And there's a whole chapter in the book about this. Eucharist living it's the model of Jesus, where here's Jesus on the cross pouring his life out. Now, we all have a choice. Will we choose to live into this sacrifice that Jesus has made, or will we walk away from it and go our own path? And so when we talk about Eucharist living, we all have passions and gifts inside of us. There are divinely ordained gifts that have been birthed within us from the moment in which we were born. Now, when we look at our gifts, when we look at what we have to offer the world, and when we are expecting others to respond to how we give of ourselves in a particular way, that is a sure way to burn out. Because now when other people, right, you talk about pastoring, and I think it's broader than pastoring, but when other people don't respond to our gifts the way in which we expect or desire or want other people to, well, then we're frustrated. Because you're like, I'm pouring myself out, I'm loving this person, I'm giving this, why aren't they responding to me? But the way of Jesus, the way of Eucharist, is you give the gift from a place of joy, and then you release the people you're offering this gift to into the hands of God. Because like you said, it's not, as a pastor, it's not our responsibility to force someone to be a certain way. You can speak, you can counsel, you can pray for each other, you can have conversations, you can coach others, but ultimately, at the end of the day, each of us gets to decide what we'll do with this example of love or the pouring out of others that have been given to you. And so Eucharist living is you just give the gift of your best self and then you leave the results to God.
What chapter is that in the book? What chapter is that? Do you remember?
It's called Eucharist living, so Eucharist I don't know. Yeah.
Back to success, there are people right now looking to any one of us and measuring their success against ours and are praying for the kind of success that you have. And I think that's kind of humbling too when you think you want more success, you failed, or it's got to be more, better when you look at yourself that way. There's someone right now praying for the kind of success that you think you don't have, and I think that gives us some perspective too. When I read the book, I described parts of it to Dave as painful, and though we were on the phone, I could hear his smile as though that was part of what you wanted to achieve, because it's a very vulnerable life that you're telling in this book. Can you explain a little bit, kind of, how you came to really let it all spill out in the book?
Yeah, I mean, right before I released the book, I was wondering, is this really a good idea? Do I really want people reading my emails? And I think that was definitely a thought as I was going through the whole process of writing it. You realize, I mean, these emails, they're not, hey, what'd you have for lunch yesterday? Or, hey, I'm going to be going to California. What's the best burger joint in California? I mean, these were emails that were birthed out of some immense pain. And I had to be okay with having other people read these emails and allowing other people, in a sense, to enter into that story, because once you write that story down, once you make it public, it's like you're letting other people behind the curtain, and you're giving people a glimpse of your life. And some of the things, I mean, maybe you're like me in this, where you don't always like people knowing about the messy parts of your life. We do our best to hide those. And for me, I got to this burnout point, and I tried hiding that for as long as I could, until eventually I couldn't any longer. And I was forced to take 2 months off from work. There's no hiding it at that point. You know, where's Dave? What's he doing? He'll be okay, and hopefully, maybe not. We don't know. So when I wrote this down, I knew either I can show these emails, and I can just make it right there on the surface, and I could just share the wisdom in the emails, and that would be okay. Or I could actually show the depth that was being communicated in these emails. So I could keep it surface level, or I could really pull the curtain back. And I said, well, if this book is going to help people, if this book can help others on their journey to create a life of purpose and joy and to follow where the Spirit is leading them in their lives, I have to really go for it. And I have to really pull the curtain back, even if I don't want to. And I felt like God was inviting me to do that, that this book would help people by me just being completely open and honest about what I had been through and some of the pain, right, the painful moments. And I've had a couple of book readings, and I always read from that burnout section because I think people can relate to that. Maybe you haven't had a full experience of burnout, but we've all had our moments of pain. We've all had our moments when life doesn't feel like it's working. I'll do this reading of burnout, and my wife will be there, and every time she hears about this season of our lives, she says it's really painful to hear about it because it brings back those memories of what life was like. But even in hearing it read and in sharing it with others, that's healing in itself. And so I think for me, even writing this book was part of my healing process to heal some of the pain that I've been through in life. And that's my hope for all of us, for everyone reading the book, that you would be able to go through your own healing journey.
Hey, Dave, I want to make an observation on that because how many of you guys remember, man, years ago, I think I watched this first podcast when it was only 100 views. Brene Brown, The Power of Vulnerability. Who saw that? If you haven't seen it, you need to watch that. And it's fantastic. She is a researcher, data and stuff like that. And when she came to this understanding of how powerful vulnerability is in your life, I was thinking about Dave's book, about how Dave's a private person, right? And so all those things were not being shared anywhere. And this book, I think the book or the emails was part of this process. It's a lesson for all of us to learn, right? Through the process of the book and the writing the emails, of releasing that and being vulnerable and releasing it out to the public and saying, yeah, because what you find is this: you find people read it and going, oh, you too. Right? Like no one kind of wants to admit that. We hide that stuff, right? And the power of sharing with other people, that's why, friends, it's so important to be part of a church, right? Because it's in a community where you do that. You can't isolate. Isolate's one of the worst things in the world. Even staying home and watching it on TV unless you have to. You need to come in here and live life with other people and then be able to be vulnerable, to be able to share that. And so, Dave, you did it through your book, and you even said that part of that writing process was part of the healing. What a testimony, and for all of us to internalize that and go, yeah, I'm not going to write a book, but I need to let that out there, because you can't get healed unless it's right. And I say healed, you know what I mean? Like we all have things we have to deal with in life. Share it with other people. I always share the same story about being in a classroom. And how many of you have been in a classroom with a professor says, Listen, if I go too fast, just raise your hand, I'll slow down and I'll back up. Anybody been a professor like that? We all have, right? And you're sitting there, and the professor's going like mad, and you're going, I am so lost, I can't believe it. And you're like going, like, I don't want to raise my hand because I'm the only one. Everybody else is obviously getting this, and I'm too slow, so you don't raise your hand. Then somebody in the back says, could you please slow down? And the rest of the room goes, whew. Because everybody's thinking the same thing. And no matter what you're going through, you think you're alone, don't you? Like you think you're alone in burnout. You think you're alone in a sickness or a disease or in a troubled time. You think you're alone. And the fact is, friends, we're not alone. We're not alone. Somebody sitting right next to you, right behind you, might be going through exactly what you're going through. That's why it's so important to share these things, right? Sorry, go ahead.
What do you hope the takeaway is for anyone that reads the book, Dave?
It's right there in the subtitle. Finding a life of purpose and joy.
Yeah.
Creating a life that is sustainable. So I never defined float until after the book came out. And I finally realized, here's what I mean by floating. Creating healthy, sustainable life rhythms that lead to purpose and joy. Mm-hmm. So that's my hope for the book.
How do we get this?
All around the back table out there. Also Amazon, Barnes & Noble, it's online. So anywhere where you can buy books.
How many read that Advent book and enjoyed it? I think you're going to enjoy this one too. I encourage you to get it. Only because I honestly, and you know me, I only promote books that I think are really good and books that I've read. And so I think this is a great book. Dave did a great job. It's easy to read. It flows. I like that. I'm not an intellectual guy. I'm not super smart, so it's easy for me to read, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. Yeah.
In this 45 minutes, I think Google has adjusted their rankings right now. So if you go to Google Dave Stradling, you'll see author Learning to Float. So Dave, always great to talk to you. Not Your Father's Faith, they will be with us again soon. So another reason to join us.
Let me close in prayer. I'll pray for Dave and everything. And why don't you bow your heads with me? And Father, thank you so much for just for friends that we can live life with and we can be open with and share our joys, our struggles, our pains. God, help us all to live that kind of life, to be open so that we can live that life of purpose and joy that Dave's talking about in his book. So I thank you for Dave, for being here with us. I pray great success with his book. And what I mean by that is, God, that it would accomplish what he wants it to accomplish, that people that read it will start to be able to kind of transform their life and start to live that kind of openness and purpose and joy. Be with Dave and Steph and the kids as they progress in pastoring the church and going around promoting the book. We thank you so much for him, God. Give him a safe trip back when he heads home, and we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Thanks, friends. Have a great day.
So if you